Kia ora, I'm Chelsea Daniels, and this is The Front Page, a daily podcast presented by the New Zealand Herald. Police interviewing techniques have been a controversial topic here and around the globe. There have been countless high-profile cases where someone has been convicted but later exonerated and their interrogations questioned. In New Zealand, Teina Pora was wrongfully convicted of murder and rape, largely based on a confession given during a lengthy police interview. And more recently, Harry Matchitt had his manslaughter conviction quashed after a so-called false confession. He spent 3 years behind bars and is now seeking $600,000 in compensation. So why do people confess to things they didn't do? Today on The Front Page, forensic psychologist Ghazi Metoui joins us to discuss the psychology behind police interviews. So tell me, why might someone confess to a crime that they actually didn't commit?
Well, first of all, let's think about what a confession is. A confession in a police context, in the criminal context, is when somebody basically admits to the crime. But you can get different types of confessions. You can get a full confession. You've accused me of X and I've admitted it. And I go on and tell you why and all the details that you want. But then you can also get tentative confessions. So I'm not telling you that I did it. I'm not necessarily saying I didn't do it, but I give some information that supports that I did it. So I might say something like, well, if you say so, then I did. Or I probably did it. So we've got to be careful of that. A full confession or a full admission versus a tentative one.
And in both of those cases, I mean, we have seen instances where people have, done a full confession or a partial confession or have said probably, I may have been there, I probably did that. But in fact, years later, things like DNA has, found out that that is completely not the case. Why would someone say, yes, I did it?
I think that probably in most cases, in life, if you think outside of the courtroom context, I think most of us have probably confessed to something that we didn't do, right? And a good example of that is maybe back in the school days when one of your mates is getting into trouble for something and you just take the fall for them. Or you might protect a sibling against your angry parent. The question then becomes like if you think, well, at one time, I did take the blame for something where I knew I didn't do it, or I apologized for something and I knew I wasn't responsible for what I did, but I apologize. So if you like, that might be a tentative admission of sorts. You can just sit back now and downplay that and think, oh yeah, it was something that I did. It was a long time ago, and you just cast over it. But if you actually stop and pause and reflect on why did you do that, right? Why did you take the blame for something that you didn't do? Most typically, if you were to stop and think, well, yeah, back at school, I took the fall for my mate. Well, you might say, well, I did it out of loyalty to them, to my friend, and I didn't want them to get into trouble. Whereas the consequences for me were far less severe. Things like that can be quite powerful drivers for why somebody might make an admission to something that they didn't do. So there's basically mechanisms that we think are why people make false confessions. That's one of them that I've already spoken about. A voluntary confession, a voluntary admission. So you literally volunteer the admission. But the other one is confessions can be, or retracted confessions can come about when people say that they were placed under pressure and they received inducements.
So that's the coercive confession or something.
Exactly. Coercive. And now we used to think that false admissions or unreliable admissions would only come about by harsh interventions, harsh interviewing styles. So literally beating somebody, assaulting them, depriving them of food, for days, electric shock treatment, all sorts of deprivation, and that level of coercion has high incidence of people agreeing to whatever's put to them because they just can't take it anymore. And the belief is, so they go into it denying the offending, but as the pressure builds and is sustained, they give up and they admit to whatever's been put in front of them under the belief that that pressure or that coercion will stop having done that. And we used to think that it would be brutality that would essentially make people confess in that context. What we now know, and we've known for a while now through research and experience, is that it could be far more subtle than that. Inducement, being offered a bribe, being offered, if you confess, this interview can stop, and or you can get to go home and be with your family. Inducements like that can make people admit to all sorts of things that later they retract.
When it comes to, I suppose, police interviews, where does the line blur, I guess, when it comes to being approachable and cordial versus being a bit too matey? When does it blur into coerciveness, so to speak?
Well, you use the word matey. It should never be matey. A police interview is never matey. If the police have reason to believe that somebody is a suspect for a crime, and that's the reason that they're questioning you, it ought to never be matey. The police have their own processes, and so they ought to be in uniform. Your Bill of Rights need to be read to you. You need to be very clear on that. And part of that is you don't need to make a statement. And that's really important, that you can speak to your lawyer without delay, that you understand these conditions. But the police approach should never be matey. It needs to be, the lines need to be well defined, that you are there because you are a suspect for X offence. So in my view, being matey, being chummy, that can create problems of reliability further down the track.
How long do you think is too long when it comes to a police interrogation, or I suppose we're calling them police interviews now?
I mean, look, I read police interviews most weeks of my career, not for this purpose, not necessarily because there's questions about the reliability of confessions, but just to read the evidential interviews that an offender or a complainant has made. And I have to say that overwhelmingly, I see excellent police processes in their questioning, and they take great care around instructing the suspect around their rights, so what we call the Bora rights, the New Zealand Bill of Rights, and they have regular breaks. And I don't think an interview should go on for hours. It shouldn't go on if it's obvious that the suspect is fatigued. But often there's obviously an asymmetry of power if you're in a police interview. And you could ask somebody, how are you? Are you going okay? Are you happy to continue? And the person might say, yes, I'm happy to continue. But they're doing that. They're saying that to try and please the interviewer. I think it's a good process for the police to insist on breaks and say, look, we'll stop now, and offer the person a drink or coffee or a smoke if they do, and just have a break. And in my experience, the police are quite good at doing that, and institutes reasonable breaks. But I don't think an interview should go on for hours. I don't think it should go on late into the night. Definitely shouldn't go on overnight. Fatigue and the like can be impediments to a good interview.
Go ahead. It's 4 declamatory sentences followed by a question for a total of 57 words.
Okay. It obviously starts with you have the right to remain silent. I know you've heard this before. And then I think it sounds something like, right. Do you have the right to remain an attorney?
Did you say that you have the right to be an attorney?
You do have the right to be an attorney if you want to.
So you mentioned something. What rights do you have when you are being interviewed or interrogated by police? So you have the right to remain silent? Is that just not in the movies?
It's definitely not in the movies. You don't need to make a statement, and you can start to make a statement and then decide that you want to stop making that statement, and that is okay. You can ask to speak to a lawyer at any time and without delay and in private. And if you're a child, if you are 16 or under, you can have a support person in there with you of your choosing. Doesn't need to be your parents. It can be somebody of your choosing.
When it comes to false confessions, what do you think are some really good examples? It could be from overseas or even here in New Zealand about how things have gone wrong and how they've been fixed.
Before I even talk about examples, I'll tell you how I got into the area. But you have to remember a couple of things. I prefer to call, in my working practice, I refer to them as retracted confessions, not false confessions. Because just because a confession is retracted, it doesn't mean it's false. And ultimately, that the court is the decision maker, and it's for the courts to decide whether somebody's statement is unreliable or not, and ultimately whether it is false or not, if it goes that far. That's not the role of an expert, as somebody such as myself. What I do is I give an opinion on it, and I give an opinion on a balance of probabilities. The other thing is that when I give an opinion, one way or another, and whether I'm saying it is, in my opinion, reliable or unreliable, the opposite side, so whether I'm instructed by the Crown or the defence, the other side will have the opportunity to get their own expert to review my work and give their own opinion. And that can even happen as many as 2, 3, 4, or 5 experts, in a case. So that's, I think, really important for people to understand. It's not that you get one expert and they decide. We give an opinion, and that's open to scrutiny and cross-examination and the like. And it's always the court that will make the decisions on that. But look, there's been a lot of high-profile cases nationally and internationally. Probably the highest profile one here in New Zealand is the Teina Pora case, where he made various statements that were found unreliable. In the UK, I was always interested in cases from the 70s. You've got the Guildford 4, the Birmingham 6, and these were very high-profile cases at the time where these individuals were accused of IRA bombings, and they had very dubious police interviewing that elicited admissions that were then retracted. That these people were found guilty, spent years in jail. I think the Birmingham 6, 16 years in prison, always maintained their innocence, and then eventually those convictions were overturned. But the way I got into this in New Zealand was very early on in my career. I had a routine assessment looking at the issue of fitness to stand trial. And this person had been accused of child sexual offending. But what was really interesting was he turned up to the police station on his own accord, and he made these disclosures. And the police, of course, did what they had to do, and part of their investigation is they went to speak to the complainant. And the complainant said that not only had this never happened, she didn't even know who the accused was, had never come across him. And of course, they checked all of that out. But they felt that because he'd made this admission, that they had to charge him. And it was early in my career, and the circumstances of this whole thing concerned me. And I remember speaking to the lawyer and said, look, in terms of his fitness to stand trial, there are no issues there. He's fit to stand trial, but I'm concerned about the reliability of this admission. And that lawyer, who's very good, went and got his own independent expert to look into this issue. And what it was found was, this person had borderline intellectual functioning. So from memory, I don't think he had intellectual disability, but he wasn't far from it. So he had cognitive limitations. And basically he was living with some friends, and they, I think there'd been some issues on their side in terms of their own offending histories. And they had said to him, he'd mentioned a girl or somebody that he'd seen, and they basically said to him that they put the accusations to him and said that the right thing for him to do would be for him to go and make this admission. And he did that to please them, to be part of the friendship circle. And it was that case, as I say, very early on in my career that got me interested in this. And that was why I started reading, quite extensively about it. And it sort of became an interest area of mine, and have been involved in various cases over the years in that.
Thanks for joining us.
Most welcome.
That's it for this episode of The Front Page. You can read more about today's stories and extensive news coverage at nzherald.co.nz. The Front Page is produced by Jane Yee and Richard Martin, who is also our editor. I'm Chelsea Daniels. Subscribe to The Front Page on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts, and tune in tomorrow for another look behind the headlines.